Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Welcome to our Saturday morning webcast of our Atma Bodha class. Let me just check we are recording properly. All right. We continue today. We're at a breaking point in the text. We finished in our previous class verse 19, and with verse 19 we finished the prior topic about the all-pervasive nature of consciousness. A simple way of putting it, as you might remember me saying, is the consciousness that's present right now in your experience, the consciousness by which you know what's going on around you, the consciousness by which you know what's going on inside your mind, that consciousness, which you take to be very ordinary, the ancient rishis revealed to be extraordinary. And Shankaracharya is explaining why that is so, that the consciousness that you think is ordinary is actually boundaryless, limitless, all-pervasive, and one. As we discussed before, the same consciousness that reveals my thoughts, my mind, my emotions, is exactly the same consciousness that reveals your thoughts, your mind, your emotions. We discussed all of that in some detail. Today we go on to begin the next topic, beginning with verse 20, the false attribution of mental activity. Some of these English words are complicated. Attribution or superimposition. This is our topic. And the example we've given, and we'll come back to it in today's class, is the orangeness of this cloth can be falsely attributed to this clear crystal. Or to use other words, we can say that the orangeness that belongs to the cloth is superimposed on the crystal. And it requires viveka, discernment, to understand that in spite of the experience of orangeness, the crystal remains perfectly clear. That's all drishtanta, the metaphor. And remember what it represents. Let the orangeness represent sadness. Let the crystal represent consciousness. So here, the orangeness that belongs to the cloth is like the sadness that belongs to your mind. But just like the orangeness of the cloth gets attributed to the clear crystal or superimposed on the clear crystal in the same way, the sadness in your mind gets falsely superimposed on you, your essential nature as a conscious being. And that's the problem we want to address. The problem is superimposition. The solution is discernment, viveka. So, with that, we will continue with verse 20. Repeat after me, please. Dehendriya gunan karman, Dehendriya gunan karman, Amale satchidatmani, Amale satchidatmani, Adhyasyantya vivekena, Adhyasyantya vivekena, Gagane nilatadivata, Gagane nilatadivata. Okay, in the first line, we have all words run together here. Deha, body, Indriya, senses, and here something tricky that Shankara presumes that you know, that the mind can be considered one of the senses. In fact, it's often called the sixth sense, in addition to our five senses. The mind is considered the sixth sense, and even technically, a sense organ in Sanskrit is called karana. Karana means instrument. So your five senses are the five karanas, five instruments for knowing the world around you. But then there's another karana. These five senses are pointed out into the world. There's a sixth karana, instrument, which is internal. Inner in Sanskrit is anta, so it is an anta karana, an inner instrument. And many of you know that antakarana is an extremely common word for mind. So here, when Shankara says deha, body, physical body, and indriya here means not only your five senses, including your five more organs of action, grasping, walking, talking, etc., but that word indriya extends to include your mind. Okay. What about the body, mind, and senses? That's what it means. Dehendriya, body, mind, and senses. What about them? They have guna and karma. They have gunas, qualities, and karma, actions. So the guna, the qualities of your body, would include qualities like gender, male, female, qualities like age, qualities like your state of health. These are deha gunas, qualities of your body. Also, there are indriya gunas, qualities of your mind and senses. If you're agitated, if you're happy, if you're sad, these are qualities of your mind and senses. And then there are karma. Karmani is the final word. Actions. Actions of your body and actions of your mind and senses. Well, what is the point he's making? All of these, the qualities, qualities, characteristics, attributes. Sometimes the word quality is misleading because quality means sometimes we think only good things, but here quality used in a more general sense to mean attribute or characteristic. So the attributes of your body, mind, and senses, and the actions of your body, mind, and senses. In the third line, adhyasyanti. They are superimposed. They are attributed. Attributed or superimposed on what? Second line, sat chit atmani. Sat, unreal, unborn, uncreated, unchanging. Chit, conscious. Atma, your true self. Atmani, on, the true, unborn, uncreated, conscious self, which is amale, which is taintless, pure, which is utterly unaffected by the problems of the body, mind, and senses. But what Shankara is saying here is that the attributes and actions of your body, mind, and senses are superimposed on the conscious essence that's your true nature. And this attribution, it's exactly like the orangeness that belongs to the cloth gets attributed to the clear crystal. In the same way, the gender of your body gets attributed to the conscious being that you are. The age of your body, the state of health of your body, and the actions of your body. When you say, I walked into the room, it's your body that walked into the room, not consciousness. The ultimate meaning of the word I, the truth behind the pronoun I, the ultimate meaning of that pronoun I is your essential nature as consciousness. So when you say, I walked into the room, the action of your body is attributed to consciousness. Similarly, for the mind and senses. So again, just as the orangeness of the cloth gets attributed to the clear crystal, in the same way, the condition of your mind, happiness, sadness, and your senses. If you say, I am short-sighted, your eyes may have a problem seeing long distances, but consciousness is not affected by that at all. And that's the key of that word amalé, meaning pure, meaning untouched by all those qualities. Notice, even in the presence of orangeness in the crystal, as we discussed before, the crystal isn't affected by this orangeness one bit. So here we're getting this very detailed explanation of this crucial problem of superimposition. I've said before that the superimposition lies at the heart of the problem of suffering. Without superimposition, you wouldn't suffer. In the presence, and let's make sure that's clear. If the problems of your body, you knew clearly they belong to your body and not to you, the problems of your body wouldn't make you suffer. Your body would still need attention, but you wouldn't suffer. Remember, we distinguished between pain and suffering. Back several classes ago, I don't want to go into great detail now, it'll distract us. Remember, pain is a sensation. Suffering is your response to that sensation. So pain in the body, you know very well. Suffering is when you go on moaning and groaning. Oh, I feel so terrible, I'm so miserable. So we distinguish that. In the absence of superimposition, pain will still be here, but you'll know that the pain doesn't belong to you. The pain belongs to your body, not to consciousness, and therefore there won't be any suffering. So as I said, suffering is due to superimposition, and the first part of this verse is describing this problem of superimposition, which is avivekena, end of the third line. It is due to aviveka, the absence of viveka, the absence of discernment. And discernment, as we've said so many times, is the key. We have to cope with the fact that experiences are misleading. The experience of orangeness in this crystal is misleading, so we better have discernment. In the same way, the experience of pain in the body, the experience of sad in the mind, those experiences are facts of life, but those experiences are also misleading. Just as the experience of orangeness in the crystal is a misleading experience, the experience I hurt or I am sad, those experiences are misleading. We require discernment. We need to know that pain belongs to the body, sadness belongs to the mind, and consciousness is amala. It is taintless. It is utterly unaffected by the pain in the body and the sadness in the mind. And we'll come to that. And now Shankara gives the drishtanta, the metaphor. Most of these verses giving a metaphor. Here the metaphor in the last line, gagane nilatadivat. That vat affix, meaning just like or just as gagane in space, nilatadi. There is blueness, etc. So the metaphor is let's be very clear. What color is space? Space, of course, is colorless. But when you look up at the sky, you see that it's blue. Once again, experiences are misleading. You experience blue sky, but it requires discernment to know that in spite of your experience of blue sky, space itself is colorless. Or if it says nilatadi, adi means etc. So you can superimpose blueness on space. You can superimpose, suppose it's smoky. In California and Oregon right now, there's so many fires burning. There's a lot of smoke in the air. So smoky color can also be superimposed on space. Or some people, especially at night, you look up and you get the sense of being underneath a huge bowl, an upside down bowl. That experience of being underneath this huge blue bowl, inverted blue bowl, that experience is also misleading. The blueness superimposed on space, the boldness, if we can use that word, superimposed on space. Now, the commentator makes a very important observation. He says, atyanta samipyat. Very important point he makes. He says that the superimposition is due to the samipya, nearness. Atyanta samipya, the absolute nearness. Look at this. What is the distance between blueness and space? There's no distance at all. You know that blueness is separate from the space, and yet you experience that blue space. So that superimposition takes place due to nearness. Perhaps this is an even better example. What's the distance between the orangeness and the crystal? No distance at all. Further, this superimposition takes place due to samipyam, means proximity, nearness. When this crystal is at a distance, you won't see the orangeness. When this crystal is close, you will see the orangeness. So this superimposition depends on nearness, on proximity. So blueness and space are together, orangeness and the crystal are together, and look at what is the distance between sadness and consciousness? You get the point. There's no distance whatsoever. That is atyanta samipyam, absolute proximity, closeness, nearness. Due to that nearness of sadness in your mind and the consciousness that illumines the mind. Due to the nearness of consciousness and sadness, superimposition takes place. The sadness that belongs to your mind gets superimposed on consciousness, which is amala. That word amale in the second line can apply both ways. It can apply both to consciousness and it applies to space. So just like space, which is amala, which is taintless, pure, clear, blueness gets superimposed on that pure, clear space. In the same way, the pain in your body and the sadness in your mind gets superimposed on consciousness, which is amala. And amala, literally taintless. And the point, though, is utterly unaffected. Blueness doesn't affect space. Orangeness doesn't affect the crystal. Pain and sadness doesn't affect your consciousness. Okay, good. Then we'll go on to the verse 21. Repeat after me. Ajnanan manasopadhehe, Ajnanan manasopadhehe, Kartritvadini chatmani, Kartritvadini chatmani, Kalpyantem bhugate chandre, Kalpyantem bhugate chandre, Chalanadiyatam bhasaha, Chalanadiyatam bhasaha. Very good. Words are a little scattered again, as they are in most of these verses. Start in the second line. Kartritwadini. Kartr may be more familiar as karta. Agent of action is karta. Kartritva, the state of being an agent of action. Ordinarily, we take ourselves as being the agent of action. I did this, I did that, I went here, I went there, I saw this, I saw that, as being an agent of action. The word adi comes once again, etc. And the two basic traits we're concerned with here is being a karta, an agent of action, and a bhokta. Now, bhokta is often translated as enjoyer, but it means when you enjoy pain and sadness. So better than enjoyer, experiencer would be a better translation. Literally, it does mean enjoyer, but practically speaking, bhokta means experiencer. So here we have these two central traits of what it is to be a human being. As a human being, you are a bhokta, an experiencer, and a karta, an agent of action. Two fundamental traits of what it is to be a human being. But you will remember from several prior verses, I think, in a prior class, we discussed how consciousness, remember that the king in the palace doesn't do anything. The ministers run around and take care of all the activities in the kingdom on the king's behalf, but the king himself just sits there and doesn't do anything. That metaphor in the previous verse represents consciousness. Consciousness doesn't do anything. Your mind is engaged in actions. Your senses are engaged in action. Your body is engaged in action. All of these activities belong to your body, mind, and senses. None of those activities belong to Atma. That's being described by Shankara in this verse. So he's talking about these two primary traits, being a karta, an agent of action, and being a bhokta, a experiencer. Both of these, end of the first line, are manasa upadhehe, breaking the words apart. They belong to the manasa upadhi. Remember that word upadhi? Upadhi is that, in Western parlance, conditioning adjunct. Manasa upadhi, the conditioning adjunct, which is your mind. Just to come back to that upadhi with a different example, we could say that this cloth is an upadhi for the crystal. Why do we say that? Conditioning adjunct. The presence of this orange cloth is an adjunct to the crystal. The presence of the orange cloth gives rise to an apparent conditioning of the crystal. So that which is a conditioning adjunct, upadhi, like the cloth is a conditioning adjunct, the orangeness of the cloth being an adjunct, appears to condition the crystal. In the same way, the condition of your mind here is also an upadhi. The condition of your mind, manasa upadhi, causes an apparent conditioning of consciousness, which is unchanging and doesn't do anything. Here's the point. Are we ready for that? Yeah. Let's see a little bit more of the verse. So, kartritwadini, the sense of being an agent of action and the sense of being an experiencer, these two fundamental traits of being a human being. Both of these, in the first line, manasa upadhehe, they belong to your mind. The sense of being an agent of action belong to your mind. We went through that in a prior class. I asked you in a prior class, who chose to watch this class? That decision-making process took place in your mind. Consciousness doesn't choose. Consciousness doesn't do anything. In the same way, being an experiencer, experience takes place in your mind as well. So being a karta, an agent of action, and being a bhokta, an experiencer. These are traits which are manasa upadhehe. They belong to your mind, but, jumping around in the third line, kalpyante, they are projected, they are attributed, they are superimposed. Superimposed on what? Second line, Atmani, on the true conscious self. This is restating what we've been seeing. The nature of your mind, in particular, the status of being an agent of action and an enjoyer of experience, these mental attributes, manasa upadhehe, they belong to the upadhi, which is your mind. Simply put, they belong to your mind. Being an agent of action and an enjoyer of experiences, these traits belong to your mind, but kalpyante, they are superimposed on. They were attributed to Atmani, to the true self. It's the same thing all over again, as they say. Just as orangeness gets attributed to the crystal, in the same way, the status of being a doer of actions and an enjoyer of experiences, these traits, as the orangeness is attributed to the crystal, these traits that belong to your mind are attributed to consciousness. Atmani, upon consciousness. By the way, there's no chatmani. Cha and Atmani, upon consciousness. They are superimposed. We need to break all the words apart. And how does that take place? First word, ajnanat. When you break the words apart, you find that ajnanan is actually ajnanat, due to ajnana, due to ignorance, due to the absence of viveka, due to the absence of discernment. Just like due to the absence of discernment, you falsely attribute orangeness to the crystal. In the same way, due to the absence of discernment, you attribute agency to consciousness. Again, when you say, I did it, the ultimate meaning of I is consciousness. Your essential nature is consciousness. So the ultimate meaning, I is a pronoun. Pronouns have referents. So the ultimate referent for that pronoun I is consciousness. Only secondarily does it refer to the body, mind, and senses. You don't say, I am a body. You say, I have a body. So ultimately, the word I refers to consciousness. But when you said, I did it, I read the book, consciousness doesn't do anything. That agency, the one who's reading, the function of reading, belongs to the mind. Manasa upadhi. And now, Shankara gives another metaphor. In fact, we've used this metaphor in a modified way before. So the first part of the verse says that traits like being an agent of action, traits that belong to your mind, these traits are superimposed on consciousness due to ignorance, due to lack of discernment. Now comes the metaphor. In the last line, you see the word yatha in the middle of the last line. Yatha, just like chalanadi ambasaha. Actually, we have to explain this whole thing. Ambugate, in the prior line, ambugate chandre chalanadi yatha ambasaha. Let me just explain. Suppose you have a pot of water outside. We used a similar metaphor before. Remember the pot of water reflecting the sun. You remember in a prior class, many pots of water reflecting one sun, giving rise to many reflected suns. We talked about that at some length. This is similar, not quite. Instead of sun, it's moon, Chandra, at the end of the third line. Chandra means moon. So suppose you have a pot outside at night, and the pot is full of water, and the water reflects the moonlight. Now suppose, so you can imagine looking into a pot filled with water and seeing the moon reflected in the pot. Suppose you jiggle the pot, you bump the pot, and you cause ripples in that water. When the water has ripples on it, and that ripply water reflects the moon, you look into the pot. Before you bump the pot, you saw a very nice moon. After you bump the pot and the water has ripples on it, now the moon has ripples. Moon doesn't have ripples. The reflection of the moon has ripples. It appears to have ripples. This is a metaphor. Look at the verse. He says, yatha, just like chalanadi, just like the chalana, the movement, ambasaha, of water, the movement of water, the ripples of water in the pot. What happens to those ripples of the water? They are, in the third line, kalpyante. Those ripples are superimposed, are projected upon chandre, upon the moon which is ambugate, the moon which is present in the water, the moon which is reflected in the water. So let's put this together now. Just like when you get ripples in the water, the ripples that belong to the water, watch this very carefully. The ripples don't belong to the moon. Ripples belong to the water. But when you see the moon reflected in the ripply water, it looks like a ripply moon. The moon doesn't ripple, but it appears to. So the ripples that belong to the water are falsely superimposed on the moon. This metaphor moon represents consciousness. Ripples represent the activities of your mind, including that sense of agency, being a karta. So look at what it represents. See the whole metaphor. Just as the ripples in the water get falsely attributed to the moon, reflected in the water, in the same way, the ripples of your mind, thoughts, sensations, emotions, excuse me. By the way, some of you know the word vritti is often used for a mental event. Anything that happens in your mind is called a vritti. Vritti can almost be considered a ripple in your mind. Those vrittis, ripples in your mind, include thoughts, include sensations, and include emotions. So these three kinds of mental ripples, vrittis, they get superimposed on the consciousness reflected in your mind. That moon is reflected in the water. Consciousness is reflected in your mind. The moon is reflected in water that has ripples. Consciousness is reflected by your mind, which has mental ripples, vrittis, thoughts, etc. And just as the ripples that belong to the water are falsely attributed to the moon, in the same way the ripples of your mind, the vrittis of your mind, thought modification, they translate vritti. The ripples of your mind are falsely attributed to consciousness. Just to relate this to the prior metaphor, body represents the pot. Inside the pot, there is water. That water represents your sukshma sharira, subtle body in general, and your mind in particular. Now here he's taking the next step, and that is the mind that's inside your body is not a static thing. It's always moving. So the metaphor here is just as the water in the pot has ripples, in the same way the mind in your body has ripples, vrittis, and the important point of this metaphor is just as the ripples that belong to the water are falsely attributed to the moon, in the same way the mental ripples, vrittis, that belong to your mind are falsely attributed to consciousness, which is reflected in your mind. Once again, I keep going back to that sadness because it's such a common experience and troublesome experience. Sadness is a ripple in your mind. But that particular ripple, sadness, gets falsely attributed to consciousness. Consciousness shines on your mind like the moon shines on the pot. When there are ripples in the pot of water, how does that affect the moon? The moon is utterly unaffected by the ripples in the pot. In the same way, consciousness, your consciousness, is utterly unaffected by the ripples in your mind, including sadness. This is discrimination. This is viveka. This is central to these teachings. Okay. That's good. We'll see one more verse. Ragecha sukha dukkhadi, ragecha sukha dukkhadi, buddhau satyam pravartate, buddhau satyam pravartate, sushuptau nasti tannashe, sushuptau nasti tannashe, tasmad buddhestu natmanaha, tasmad buddhestu natmanaha. Good. This is one of the few verses where Shankara doesn't give a drishtanta, no metaphor. Instead of metaphor, some very powerful reasoning. And reasoning is very simple. Some of the reasoning used in Vedanta can get very sophisticated. Here, very simple, straightforward reasoning. Start in the second line. Before we get into the verse, we have to recall an important teaching we've already seen. We've said consciousness reveals the activities of your mind. Consciousness is like the sun that shines, revealing the activities on this planet. In the same way, consciousness shines, revealing the activities of your mind. And you might remember from a prior discussion that your mind can be in one of three conditions: waking state, dream state, or deep sleep. Waking state is Jagrat Avastha for our Sanskrit scholars out there. Dream state is Swapna Avastha, and deep sleep is Sushupti Avastha. Your mind will be in one of these three conditions at all times. And the three conditions, three states of your mind, all of that is illumined by consciousness. Consciousness shines upon your mind, reveals the activities of your mind in all three states. In the waking state, right now, your consciousness reveals what's happening in your mind right now. Tonight, when you're dreaming, consciousness will reveal whatever you're dreaming about. But then, in those periods of dreamless sleep, we call that sushupti. Sushupti, dreamless sleep. In those periods of dreamless sleep, consciousness reveals the absence of activity in your mind. Very important. We discussed at length how consciousness, like the sun goes on abiding, sun goes on shining at all times. Even when a dark cloud obscures the sun goes on shining. The sun never ceases to shine. In the same way, consciousness never ceases to illumine your mind. Consciousness ceaselessly illumines the activities of your mind when you're awake. Consciousness illumines the activities of your mind while you're dreaming. And consciousness illumines the lack of activity in your mind during deep, dreamless sleep, sushupti. We need to recall that important teaching to understand this verse properly. Now, start in the second line. Buddhau satyam pravartate. Buddhau satyam, that much. For our Sanskrit students, locative absolute, sati saptami, don't worry about it. When the buddhi, mind, intellect, you know that. Buddhau satyam, when the intellect is present, when the mind is active. Mind is active means we're talking about waking state and dream state. We're excluding deep sleep. In deep sleep, your mind is inactive. By the way, a little technical part in Vedanta, we say that the mind is present, but it's in a resolved condition. It's in an unmanifest condition. So, in the waking state, the mind is manifest. In the dream state, the mind is manifest. In deep sleep, the mind is unmanifest. Okay, so buddhau satyam. In the waking and dream states, when the mind is manifest, what happens is, in the first line, raga, desire, ichcha, also means desire. Say, take raga as passion, ichcha, desire, sukha, pleasure, dukkha, pain. These are all things we experience. Raga, in fact, better translation for raga here would be attraction. So raga, attraction, ichcha, desire, sukha, pleasure, dukkha, pain, suffering. All of these experiences, end of the second line, pravartate, they all exist when buddhau satyam, when your mind exists, all of these experiences exist. Buddhau satyam, when your mind exists in the waking and dream state, then all of these experiences exist. But sushuptau, during deep sleep, nasti, nasti. Sushuptau tan nashe. I have to connect the words properly for you. Sushuptau, in deep sleep, tan nashe, when your intellect is Nasha literally means destruction, but as I said, the mind doesn't get destroyed. It's in an unmanifest condition. You might wonder, why do we make these subtle distinctions? Why don't we say that the mind ceases to exist in deep sleep? Well, if your mind ceased to exist in deep sleep, if your mind was non-existent in deep sleep, how could you wake up? That which is non-existent doesn't become existent. So rather than saying that mind is non-existent in deep sleep, we say it remains in an unmanifest condition. And here Shankara is not getting into those details, so I'm adding the details for you. Tannashe, when your intellect is absent in deep sleep, absent meaning when it is in an unmanifest condition, sushuptau, in deep sleep, then what? Nasti. All those experiences in the first line, na asti, they don't exist. What experiences? We said raga, attraction, ichcha, desire, sukha, dukkha, pleasure and pain. All those experiences are present in the waking state and dream state when your mind is present, and all those experiences are absent in the deep sleep state, sushupti, when your buddhi is in an unmanifest condition. So this is what Shankara says in the first 3/4 of this verse, leading to my favorite question. Some of you know my favorite question? So what? So what means, what's the point? What is the point that Shankara is making here? Look at this. Consciousness is present in all three states. If those experiences of attraction, desire, pleasure, and pain, if those experiences truly belong to consciousness, shouldn't they be present whenever consciousness is present? And consciousness is present in the waking state. Consciousness is present in the dream state. And as we've explained, consciousness is indeed present in deep sleep, dreamless sleep. If all of these experiences of pleasure and pain, etc., if they truly belong to the consciousness, which is your essential nature, they should be present not only when you're awake or dreaming, but even in deep sleep. You should experience pleasure, pain, attraction and aversion, desire, etc., but you don't experience attraction and aversion and desire in deep sleep. What he's leading up to is the point that if these experiences truly belong to consciousness, they should be present in all three states, waking, dream, and sleep. But they don't exist, they're not present, those experiences are not present in deep sleep, showing that those experiences do not belong to consciousness. Then to whom do those experiences belong? You get it. It's your mind that's present in waking and dream, your mind that's absent in deep sleep. This establishes the fact that all these experiences belong to your buddhi, your mind, your intellect, which is present in waking and dream, which is absent or unmanifest in deep sleep. And it proves without a shadow of a doubt that all of these experiences belong to your mind and not to consciousness, which is what Shankara concludes in the last line. Tasmat. Therefore, buddhehi tu, they belong to, very specifically. All of these experiences are buddhehi, they belong to your buddhi, your mind, your intellect. Na atmanaha. Atmanaha means of Atma, belonging to Atma. They do not belong to Atma. Again, the so what part is this, that everything you experience is transient, is a transient activity of your mind, or in deep sleep, inactivity of your mind, and it all belongs to your mind, not to consciousness. This is the discernment. And let me just summarize this. The final discernment is this. Oh, let me introduce one important Sanskrit word. Shankara doesn't use it, but it is certainly relevant here. And that word is asanga. Sangha means association. Asanga, unassociated. The point he's making here is that there is sangha, association, between all these experiences and your mind. There is no sangha, no association between all these experiences and consciousness. And the reason that's important is to know that your consciousness is utterly unaffected by whatever happens in your mind while you're awake. Your consciousness is utterly unaffected by whatever happens in your mind while you're dreaming. And your consciousness obviously remains unaffected when your mind is in an unmanifest condition in deep sleep. The point then is that your consciousness remains Sat Chit Ananda, or to use some English words to fill that in with meaning. Your consciousness remains unborn, unchanging, unlimited, vast, perfect, complete, full. It remains that in all three states. In one of our very first classes, we said that what we loosely call the inner divinity, that expression refers to consciousness. Your consciousness remains in that perfect, divine condition regardless of whatever's happening in your mind. While you're awake, while you're dreaming, while you're asleep, your consciousness remains perfect, pure, complete, at all times, in all situations. We'll conclude our class here. Continue next time. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhaveta Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.